good, fam?
All right, what's going on, guys? Josh Answers. Today we are going to talk about inflation and unemployment and how it relates to trading, you know, using economic data like that to trade. But more or less, I'm gonna just talk about why it's so important as far as the economic situation goes. So if you guys like the video, if it's helpful, make sure you like the video. Only if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. We have videos posted every single day, and give me your suggestions too of what you guys want me to talk about. And I usually write this stuff in the description. If there's anything you want me to elaborate on from any of these videos, just put it in the comments, so then that way I could see what you guys are hanging with and what's not really doing that well for you. So the whole idea of why I'm going to talk about unemployment, inflation, probably more or less on inflation, simply because the fact that you hear this a lot. Like, you hear Janet Yellen, you know, the Fed chair, her job is to manage damn it, I missed the carpool lane. But Janet Yellen's job is pretty much to handle unemployment and inflation. You know, that's where when people ask her what's going on, that's what they want to see. So it's important because those two factors have a thing. So if you guys aren't familiar with inflation, you know, quite simply what inflation is, it's just it's when prices inflate. You know, a lot of people, it's when the money supply gets increased. Pretty much it's getting the same amount of, the same objects cost more money. And an indicator of that is like CPI, the Consumer Price Index. What they do is they take a bag of items, you know, generally used items like everything from toothpaste to shampoo, they put them in a basket, and from that basket, that's how people, you know, they see how those prices shift and adjust month by month, year over year, to say, okay, now it takes more dollars to get that same basket or less dollars. There's inflation and deflation. Now, it's kind of confusing to some people because when we say inflate, you would think that something's getting bigger. And what is getting bigger is the money supply. That's why when there's more money in the system, there's more money, you know, supply and demand, that brings the value of the dollar down. But why they call it inflation is because it causes prices to inflate. However, it essentially translates to a weakening currency. So that's why some people confuse inflation and deflation. So make sure you guys get that. But the thing about inflation and, you know, why we want to look at that data is because it affects a lot of things. It affects people's purchasing power and real income, and it's showing if people are spending more, if it's easier to get your hands on money. All of those relate to inflation because, like we said, there's going to be a bigger money supply. And it's also very important because you have stuff like even labor unions, you know, people who are trying to negotiate how much people should get paid, even the Fed, every single company, even trading, they all make pretty much assumptions and estimates on what inflation is going to be, because if they're not able to, they lose money. You know, for example, like labor unions, if they expect inflation of 2 or 3%, they're going to request a 2 or 3% raise for that whatever contract or whatever time period for their workers, because if the money supply, or if the dollar inflates by 2 or 3%, that means when they're getting paid $10 an hour, items are going to go up 2 to 3% to get the same exact items they're living on. So their real income actually goes down. So what they want to do is they want to factor in a higher inflation rate and say, well, yeah, we want to make sure we're getting paid 3-4% extra down the road, because it's not as if they're making more money, because inflation just makes it so that they're working for the same amount of instead of less. And then, you know, and this is the problem, because how it could affect businesses and companies and economics is when you get unusual inflation or deflation, you got to understand that there's labor unions, companies, you know, business in general, they all have these contracts. So if anything happens, you know, it could lead them to either making money or losing money, you know. So picture a company now, they are factoring in 5% inflation, and they sign their labor, you know, they're giving their workers so they don't get sued and all that, and to make sure everyone's happy, they're going to say, okay, we're going to pay, you know, your wages will increase 5% so that it makes sure they're getting the most money. Now, what would happen if instead of inflation, you don't see inflation and it actually deflates. Well, because now if the currency gets stronger, they just guaranteed these guys 5% more money, and now the currency didn't inflate, it deflated. So essentially, they're paying them a higher face value, and it's giving them more purchasing power. So that means they're spending now 5% more to get the same work they were getting the year before. And that's why it hurts people, and that's why it could even lead to unemployment, because even at the same time, usually you get lower unemployment with higher inflation. You know, if you are not familiar with that, that's called the Phillips curve. I suggest you look at it. That's from like the whole Keynesian economics. However, some would, modern economics nowadays, they argue that it doesn't exist. But the Phillips curve pretty much posits the relationship between unemployment and inflation, and usually when you have high inflation, you have low unemployment, and when you have low inflation, you have higher unemployment. And we'll get into that, because when you have higher low inflation, that means, again, more money into the system, more government spending. You know, that means the government's working on getting people jobs and all that stuff. So, but even then, hopefully you see how it relates. Again, this is why for Janet Yellen it's so important, because she needs to be able to figure out, hey, you know, I need a balance. You know, not only is she controlling a part of the money supply in a weird way, but her job is inflation and unemployment. So people want to see what's going on with that. Now for you guys, you could factor in changes, because if you see, you know, and this is how I use Forex partly to make decisions trading, because if you're seeing currency moves change, and they're changing drastically, you should be able to understand what companies have longer term contracts or have certain scenarios where they get hit by that. And guess what? That could be 5, 10, 15% of their margins. Like if you go look, I was actually with the pledge class, we were looking over the filings for AMD. You know, they're a pretty decent company, but I was just kind of showing how they don't even compare to NVIDIA because of what they do, but they make 4 to 6 billion in revenue every quarter. But in 2015, since they got a lot of foreign revenue, the dollar strengthened greatly in that time period, and it led to them making like 10, 20% less. That was one of their worst years. You know, if you go look at most filings, 2015 to 2016, a lot of companies did bad, and it wasn't because they were selling less, but simply because of really they lost money for paying more, paying less, or then even converting stuff. That's what they call currency translation. And I'll make another video on that to go more in depth, but that's the idea here with inflation and unemployment. And you guys see how they relate, because a lot of economists over time, there is some relationship. It's hard to say exactly what and how it correlates, but you can't really ignore how that's going to affect the economy and what it says beyond just the simple facts of saying, hey, oh, inflation's bad, your money's less. It's all relative. That's what you got to understand. It's not bad until you can see the greater scope and how it connects and leads to other countries, businesses, and all that. And then same thing with unemployment. But even then, it's just good to know what employment's at. And if there's, you know, everything from now analyzing employment, you got like the labor force, active labor force, people seeking continued job claims versus initial jobless claims, excuse me. You got to see the differences between those. And, you know, for that, I think initial jobless claims is people who just reported for unemployment. It's like 30 to 60 days. And then after, if they're still looking for jobs, that's what they'll say, continued jobless claims. What else is there? I just said I'm blanking. But there's the people, the labor force, the active labor force. And that's something you got to realize. That's, again, all relative. What is the employment rate compared to how many people are active? I actually just posted a picture on Instagram. If you go look at it, you have 1.9% of the world's population is simply too young to work. And then you got a whole nother 600 million people who are too old to work. So that's where you guys got to realize everything is relative. So you got to be careful. And it's just same concept here. I'll make a video on it. It's the same thing with inflation. There's a difference between face value and real value. So just because you see a certain unemployment number, you have to be able to take that in relation to how many people are active, how many, you know, to get a real data set on that. So I'll leave it at that. it's kind of a rough overview, but I did go into a lot of specifics with it. But this is, again, how I use economic data and how I'm looking at stuff. And hopefully you guys see the level of, you know, I seek to understand a lot about what's going on with everything from politics down to all these little economic factors. And a lot of traders ignore this stuff, but when you really know how to interpret it and interpret it properly, it's kind of eye-opening how valuable it is. And you're able to understand the people on the news and these weird headlines a lot better. So I encourage you guys to look into that stuff, and that's why, again, it starts with patience and starting to learn this deep, because you got to realize if you're not aware of this stuff and how it goes, you could be leaving a lot of money on the table or just trading without even knowing what's going on. And you got to think you're going against people like me who are aware of that, so be careful in that sense. But I hope you guys like it. Make sure you subscribe. If you got any questions, again, put them below, and I'll be happy to elaborate. Stay in school.